Thanks everybody for being here today. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. Toni, Leo, Denise, Kofi, Jamhal. Really appreciate you all coming together for this really interesting conversation that really kind of came about from a couple of other conversations I've had, and our good friends over at BeoirFest in Europe were putting together some discussions about African brewing traditions, and then about what's happening in craft beer today. And naturally, it seemed like a really good idea to talk to you fine people about how you are being very much influenced by African heritage, something that is quite rare these days. So I truly appreciate you all taking the time for this conversation as part of the Chicago Brewseum. Again, the Brewseum is a nonprofit organization, and we are the world's first nonprofit dedicated to telling the global story of beer. And I think this session in particular is sort of like the epitome of what we try to do, right? Bring people from different places in the world with different experiences who are part of the beer industry to help us learn more about one another and about beer. So thank you again. I'm going to hand it over to Toni, who will be an amazing moderator for this. Appreciate you being here and appreciate Black and Soul being a part of this. With that, Toni, I'll mute myself and make myself go away.
All right. Like Liz just said, my name is Toni. I am one of the co-founders of Black and Soul. And yeah, so we're gonna jump right in, ask a few questions about how folks are bridging their cultures and their culture from Africa with beer. So to start out, I always like to ask this question when I'm talking about beer is how people got interested in it. So Jamhal, you want to kick us off and tell us how you got into beer?
Sure. Well, my profession, so I'm a CPA, I'm a corporate tax accountant, and I worked in public accounting for quite some time. And during that, I have to travel to some really like small, obscure places, like middle of nowhere America, and oftentimes I would go eat at a local brewery, and they would have different, beer selections. So just being a fan of beer in general, and just being exposed to craft beer through traveling to small towns, that kind of increased my interest, like overall in beer.
Okay, sounds good. Leo and Denise, you got anything to tell us about how you got into beer?
First, well, my name is Leo, and I'm from West Africa. I got into brewing because of my mom. My mom was the one that was brewing. It's a great tradition in Africa for women to brew because of cooking and all of that. So I got into brewing because of her. So she was brewing at home once a year, and that's how I got introduced to brewing. And I never stopped ever since, brewing and distilling. That's how I got into brewing. Yeah. I went from radio, television to chef, and then to brew.
That's quite the jump. But
right.
It's interesting you said that your mother was the brewer at home. That's a history that's told, that women were the first brewers, and that was a thing that women did. But
well, still
hear
today,
a whole lot about Black women doing the brewing.
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that from somebody.
Yeah. And I would say that I got into beer, so I don't do the brewing, I do everything else in the brewery. I got into it really because of him. Like he had been home brewing for a long time, and people would say, hey, this is really good stuff. You need to be selling this, you need to do this. And he's always been very entrepreneurial minded and was like, hey, we need to open up something, we need to do something. We would also go visit breweries whenever we were like on vacation or traveling, and just kind of like the whole laid back vibe of most breweries. But we're like, hey, in our town, something like this is needed and we need to do this. And he was like, we need to do this before somebody else gets the ideas, and we need to hurry up and do it. And my background is business and marketing. and doing lots of research. So when I saw he was serious about it, I was like, okay, let me look further into it. And I kind of checked out the industry and saw that, hey, it's actually growing and there's a lot more room, especially where we're based out of in New Jersey, where the laws were just starting to change a little bit to make it a little bit more feasible and yeah, so make it more economic sense to do that. And I was like, oh, you may have something there. And then I saw that there weren't like hardly any breweries of people looking like us. And I'm like, oh, that could be also our main difference, what we could bring to the plate. Because we're like, we don't want to just open up something and do the exact same thing as everybody else. It's like, what's unique that we bring to it. And yeah, and then just visiting and going to different breweries and tasting, I'm like, oh, okay, this is actually kind of good. The beers taste different and they don't all taste the same, and got to find a style that I like and stuff. And that's kind of how I got into beer.
Nice. Kofi, you want to tell us how you got into beer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just listening to these stories, and that's the beautiful thing about the beer industry. Everyone really literally comes from a different place. And that's kind of the argument for diversity right there. Outside of skin color and other stuff, just the diversity of perspectives is what to me makes kind of the beer industry pretty cool. So I'm a little different. I mean, I come from a family of cooks, big eaters, drinkers, flavor chasers, so to speak. And so, I didn't realize this at the time, but really growing up in Ghana, I was surrounded by a lot of the local beverages, beer. I hated all of it. I didn't like any of it. I thought it was disgusting. Until I got to college, kind of got the taste for beer, obvious ways. And coming out of college, though, I don't know what it was about beer, but it really kind of stuck to me. And I think what it was just the eclectic nature of all the styles. Being really young, walking into a store and seeing a beer section where there's literally aisles of beer was fascinating to me. And I started kind of taking that journey, tasting all these different beers. I realized that, my flavor chaser side came in and was like, well, how are they doing this? Why is this beer this color? And I started to ask myself a lot of questions, which led to kind of reading about beer, which one day I get to a point where I'm like, I'm going to try and make this. So I buy a kit off Amazon. I buy John Palmer's How to Brew. I sit down. I would love to tell you to say I read the whole book. I probably read the first chapter because the first chapter is a recap of the entire process. So I was like, oh, I'm good, and that's really how it started. And lots of time, lots of energy, lots of money, and something really, the bug of the art and the science of brewing really, really caught me. And eventually you get to a point where you refine your product. I'd love to say that I was kind of always thinking about starting this business and kind of building that foundation from the ground. But the honest truth is I started brewing with my cousin, who's my business partner, and we just took ourselves more seriously than we needed to. It was like a big joke. So we had the name for the company when we were home brewing. Anyone that helped us out with anything had to sign a fake volunteer waiver, and they were volunteers and employees. And we kind of carried ourselves in a certain way, but it was a joke, but we carried ourselves from that way in day one. And when we got to a point where, I spent a lot of time in other people's breweries, drinking other people's beer. And I finally had a day where it really hit me. I was with one of my really good friends and we were drinking somewhere and he's like, you know what? Not really feeling this. Let's just go back to your basement and drink what you have in the basement. I kind of look at him and I'm like, you're right. What I have at home is better. And that kind of really lit the fire to say, well, this place has mediocre beer, but it's packed. Why shouldn't we be making, why shouldn't we get in on some of this pretty much? And this is, not knowing the dynamics of the beer industry, nothing, just saying we have a product that I feel is just as good. Let's try and bring this to the foreground. And, then you realize that oh, there's not a lot of people that look like you doing this. And then you realize you start to see kind of the challenges and some of the barriers, but, we leaned into kind of who we were, which are two guys who were raised in West Africa between Nigeria and Ghana, built our company around that and haven't looked back since. And so that's kind of how we got in.
So to segue, and you mentioned flavor chasing and that you're from West Africa. How did those cultures from those two places you mentioned, Nigeria and Ghana, influence how you went about opening your brewery and what you decided to brew?
Yeah, so we're a contract facility, so we don't own a brewery just yet. I know this is a virtual image behind me, but we don't own a brewery just yet. But that's a very insightful question. I would say that the culture didn't really get me into beer, but once I got into beer, it allowed me to come into it in my own, in the sense that once I got comfortable with the process of cleaning, making beer, understanding how to really work with the ingredients, is when I started to get the confidence to say, I make BSOP every week. Hibiscus tea every week. The flowers are literally sitting in my kitchen. I've got this pale ale that I'm boiling on the stove right now. What happens if I throw some flowers in here? Right? Or, and then eventually I'd start like emailing my mother and be like, I know you're coming in a couple months, please go to the market, grab this, stuff it in your shoes, hide it in the back, and then she'd start bringing like all these random ingredients to us, and we'd start working with them, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't work. And again, not knowing we were going to start a company, but these are the beers that we just started making. And it just felt so natural by the time the company came around. It's like, this is who we are. This is what we do. And even more so, I think it was very important that you will hear a lot of folks, especially folks that look like us, that getting into the beer industry, we're not just doing it just because we think we can make another beer. Like, everyone is really doing this because we feel there's something different that we're bringing to the table. And I think that's very important, because there's 9,000 maybe at this point plus breweries around, and a lot of people just kind of get in on the game. Like, I can make lagers, I can make this, I can do this. And I've personally always come at it from a way of, there's a million lagers. You don't need me to make another one unless I can add something to the conversation, or I feel like I'm doing I'm doing something and bringing it to the forefront that's going to work with our branding and the messaging that we're trying to put forth. So I always tip my hat to a lot of these, Black and brown breweries that are coming up, because I've really seen the thoughtfulness and kind of just the unique stance that people are trying to bring to the table. And it's very organic. It's not fictional at all. Like, and that's what I love so much, because everyone has their different perspective of what they're bringing to the game.
Sounds good. And you bring up branding, Jamhal. I just want to say that your branding is beautiful. I love it. You wanna tell us about how you came up with the brand?
Sure. I don't know if you guys can see the cans, but no. For us, my business partner reached out to me. We've always been like entrepreneurial. We've had other business ventures and stuff like that we've done over the years since college. But he was living in South Florida at the time, and he had lost his job due to COVID, and he was like doing Uber Eats, right? So he had gotten this large order of all this like beer, right, at to this like mansion, like party, and he just assumed there would be a bunch of white people, you know what I mean, because of how much beer it was, and the type of beer it was. It was like PBR or something like that. And to his surprise, he opened the door opened, it was like all these Black people like hanging out and having a party. He's like, all this beer is for you guys? They were like, yeah, So he called me and he said, hey, I think we should do beer. I think we should do it. And my wheels turned. I knew, just if we were gonna do beer, we would need to be different. There's a million breweries, and in my opinion, lots of people kind of approached it, from a beer enthusiast standpoint, right? Not necessarily focusing on, African American demographic. When you look at most breweries, they create like all these beers, and that's great and that's cool, right? But our target market, or African Americans, we felt were our brand, our brand loyal, right? They care about brands, they care about something that resonates or connects with them, right? So for me, I felt we needed to be brand forward in our approach, making like quality beer, making beer that pairs with food, You know, one of my business partners, he has a background in fine dining. He's worked at some of these extremely fancy restaurants and stuff like that. So we had, you know, access to, you know, sommeliers and things like that. So when we think about our recipes and how we want our beer to taste, we kind of incorporated all these things that we had access to. And the other thing too is we wanted to grow the space, right? Not just, you know, from a manufacturer standpoint, but from a drinker standpoint, right? We wanted to make beer that's more palatable, to that our, you know, to our target market, make it a lot more drinkable, less hoppy, and just delicious, basically. And again, it having it paired well with food. But from the branding standpoint, though, we wanted to create, you know, just tap into that culture, if you will, be culture forward. It was at a time during the whole George Floyd incident happened. You know, I felt like, you know, as a community, we needed to remember, you know, some of our history. You know, there was a time when we were, you know, leaders and ran the world, and you know, the Moorish history is a little known, or a very little taught history here in America. You see it mostly in Europe, but you know, just from a symbolic standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, you know, we wanted to be cool and inviting, you know, and I felt that, you know, Moors was a perfect brand name, and, you know, depicting a king with, you know, in a postmodern way would be appealing. So I think we hit a home run there, and so that invites a lot of people in. But you know, the taste of the beer, I think, is what locks them in. So we're very happy and grateful that we could, you know, tap into the Northern African culture and leverage that to in our way, you know, from an artistic standpoint, not just from the beer, but from a brand standpoint.
What kind of flavors are you using?
Okay, sure. So we have 3 beers so far. You know, our flagship beer is our Morris Session Ale. It's a 5%. It's very light and drinkable. It's crushable. As I said, it's made with green papaya, with some key lime with a lemongrass finish. So it's very light and citrus. It's very tasty. Actually, it's our most popular one. And then we have an IPA. It's 6.7, so it's not very, very high. But it's made with a little grapefruit with some pretzel dough flavor, if you will, with a hint of honey malt finish. So it's very it's a little sweet, less hoppy on the back. And then we have our Imperial Porter, which is made with some blueberries, some roasted chocolate and coffee with a hint of lavender. So it's very it smells great on the nose, and it's very smooth. So all of our beers are smooth and drinkable, and our porter is like 8.3, so it's pretty up there, but it's not heavy. You know, no one wants a heavy beer, you know, so we make it pretty light and drinkable, and we intend to come with a lager as well. So we want to pretty much, you know, round out our beer offerings, pretty much hitting every group before we start having fun with some other seasonal beers. So definitely excited about, you know, what we're doing. We also introduced like the history as well, you know, on the back of our cans, kind of, you know, starting the conversation. You know, many people haven't even heard of the Moors, or they may have heard some things here and there, but not really diving in. So it's a great conversation starter. I found it to be very effective amongst our target market, but as well as, you know, everyone else. So we're very excited.
Sounds good. All right, Denise and Leo, how does your culture influence your brewery and your beer?
I mean, everything. I'm from Africa. What else I'm gonna make? So, you know, it is everything. We make over 40 different kind of beer. We have constantly 24 beer on tap. So you will find some ingredient from all over Africa, from tamarind to baobab to there's a fruit called four corner fruits that nobody ever heard of in the U.S. And we have also how you call them
We
again?
also use hibiscus as
There's
well.
hibiscus, there's coconut. Most of our beer are like that. You know, we out of the 24 beer, these is the kind of beer you're gonna find, and we're constantly experimenting. Every week we have a new release of a new beer, of a new flavor that we'll put out there for people to try. And these are African ingredients that we love to work with. Recently, I distilled the baobab on Discovery Channel and one master distiller last year. So it is very important to integrate all our culture into the beer we make. It's extremely important. When I look back in the whole continent, in all African continent, beer is owned by other people. And that's very disappointing. All our mothers used to have small brewery in every area. I remember where I grew up, there was over 10 local brewery run only by women. Every ethnic group have their own type of beer. You go to the Samo group, they have their type of beer. They make a beer that is extremely strong. You go to the Bisa, these are ethnic group. Everybody have their own kind of beer. So those things are disappearing right now due to European influence in the whole African continent. And it's very, very disappointing. The whole continent is owned by only one single family, which is the Castel family. They make beer in my country. They make beer in Ivory Coast, in all over Africa. And it is, when I take a look at this, I'm like, it's unbelievable. And when you look at all the younger people today back in Africa, everybody's having diabetes because the brew is made with corn. Corn is very, it's, you know, I'm not gonna try to tell you exactly what corn represents, but corn is very dangerous. We don't brew with the single corn in our beer. You know, most of our lager is made differently. There's not a single corn in our beer.
Yeah. So one of
Right.
the things that we said we opened up when we tell our story and we talk about our mission is that although our brewery is named after the town, so the town that we live in is called Montclair, because we knew our audience, we actually live here too, and we know how they're really, really proud of their town, of our town and so forth. So we knew to get like the community support and all of that, that it made sense to name it after the town. However, we always tell the story that one of the reasons we wanted to open up too is it's a way to share our background and our story with the wider community. So while Leo is from West Africa, Burkina Faso, my family's actually from the Caribbean, from Jamaica. So by way of Africa. So we bring in ingredients from that as well. And it's funny because then we realize, like if I learned like certain ingredients I thought was only in the Caribbean or Jamaica, and then he tells me, oh no, we got that in Africa. That came from Africa.
Well, Caribbean comes
So
from, I mean,
yeah,
human
but-
being. You know.
but it's important. So one of the things, as you mentioned, is like the baobab fruit. So we have a beer, it's like one of our staple beers called the Bao beer, which is made from the African baobab fruit. And we tell that story. A lot of people's like, what is that? We're like, have you ever seen the movie Lion King or Madagascar? Those really tall trees. They're like, oh, I never even knew fruit grows on it. And we actually have one of the fruits here at the brewery. So we're like, this is actually it. We also have a picture of it, of the tree and all of that we share. And we tell the story about that. When we have coconut, I'll tell them, hey, well, that's my family background, Jamaica. We got a lot of coconut groves, coconut and stuff like that. So we add that. We have the tamarind, so which I thought was all Caribbean. I guess they have that in Africa too. But yeah,
silly.
so yeah,
So, well,
but yeah, we it's important to us. So there, not all our beers have those ingredients. As you mentioned, we have lots of different beers, but it's important that we have a good amount that has our culture into it. And on our beer can, it tells a story. They know who's the owner of the brewery. They know about our background. So that's our stories on every single beer can, no matter what beer style it is. That story is there because we want to educate and let people know that, hey, there's other people who actually own breweries that make beer and so forth. So that's
so
important.
yeah, it's very important for people like us to get into the brewing industry because to begin with, beer was invented in those areas. So it is, to me, it's so natural for other people to join that industry, so we can showcase all these ingredients that come from elsewhere. Don't let these big boys come and destroy, you know, the, you know. So that those are what kind of keep me awakened all the time, because you know, you drink other beer, you end up sick, and it's not fair. So that's something that it's in my heart, and then we're looking forward to change the way beer is made.
Okay, we got a question in the chat. Does four corner fruit taste similar to any other fruits? Is it like a type of citrus or something?
No, it tastes like a chocolate. You will find that in Ghana. There's a different name as you move on from country to country. In Ivory Coast, it is called differently. And in Burkina, they call it the four corner fruit. It tastes literally like honey, and you get those honey note and chocolate note. It's incredible. Yeah.
And I remember we made a sour beer with
Yeah.
some other fruit.
Right. Oh yeah, the weather fruit.
Oh,
the
the
weather fruit
yeah.
is grow in the wilderness. It grows in Senegal, and it grows also in my country in the wilderness. So we made a sour beer called the Tantrum Sour. This is a political beer. So we made that when the other guy was president. So we call it Tantrum. So these are the kind of stuff that you know would be interesting to show people what is out there in the continent. It's very important.
I agree. So Kofi, I know we're on with Chicago Brewseum. We talk a lot about beer history and stuff, and we see a lot of people, certain people, writing books about it and such. What do you think is left out that's very important that should be included?
Man, like I'm literally just listening to Leo, and it's all of that, right? I think, you know, I don't knock the authors who are out there trying to document what's happening in beer, because people write from their perspective, right? And so, you know, how can a white male author with American, European-centric beer experiences tell the story of beer history, or even current day beer stories that are happening on the continent? It's even if you put them on a flight and put them there, the story would be different. And so the challenge for us, whether directly or indirectly, is to find our way to bridge the gap. That's what I always come back to. I listen to, everything Montclair has been doing. I've seen it myself. I've been in their brewery. I've had the beers. They're great. Us, whether in big ways or little ways, and to find the way to continue to bridge the gap and tell that story, because I'm not a writer. But if I can inspire someone who is a writer to get into beer, to kind of tell this story, then that's amazing. And now I can't directly just go out there and look for writers and do that, but what I can do is continue to do what I'm doing, carry myself at a high level, come to events like this, share our story, because you never know who's listening and who's watching. We're 3-4 years going in the game, and if there's one thing I've learned, someone is always watching. I've had people start breweries and come back to me. I'm just learning about their brewery, but they're like, no, you inspired me 3 years ago when you talked to me about this, and I don't even remember meeting them, right? Like, that's the unfortunate challenge that we have, whether it be beer or anything else that we're stepping into, where there's a lot of people that don't look like us, is we're immediately, call it a burden, whatever you want to call it, but we're immediately strapped with that responsibility to not only carry ourselves at a high level, but to share our story, because there's lots of other people who are listening to what we're saying and they will be inspired. I think, a lot about just kind of my experiences in Ghana specifically. And, there's always shock. Leo talking about his mother brewing, there's always shock that like women are brewing. Well, there's no one else but women brewing in Ghana. Like, I can't say I've ever seen a man who even knows anything about taking grains and fermenting it and turning it into a beverage. I've never met that man in Ghana. If you find one, they'll just tell you my auntie, this woman, the woman down the road, you know, never going to be a man. And so when you look about kind of the vulnerability of not only Black culture, but Black women within Black culture, if these are the people who are kind of supposedly, you know, the vanguard for this culture, well, it's at risk. And it is our responsibility to go back and start to, you know, experiment. And these are things that I've pressed on myself about, right? Like, we have our name, every beer that we have tells a story. And so, you know, I think it's all important. Everything as small as, like, we have a beer that's a wheat beer called Harmattan Haze, right? Well, Harmattan is one of the seasons that we have back home. Most people have never heard of it, right? But even these little things, you start to create this affinity or this kind of understanding of everyday life or just kind of culture in Africa, and you kind of get people excited to go back and explore. And that's kind of important for me, because if we don't do that and people don't go back to reclaim this stuff, it will be lost. I mean, the level of just American, European, the impression that Western culture has everywhere else in the world is just amazing to me. But unfortunately for African culture, it tends to kind of just die it out. And unfortunately, like, beer is very cool here now. We're all sitting here, we're on a virtual session. Everyone's very excited about beer, but we're not there in Africa. There is no beer culture, so to speak. And so that's something I know that I can't claim to turn it for the whole continent, but I'm very intentional about every time I go home, connecting with people who are interested in building beer culture and equipping them with what knowledge, what support, whatever I can give them, because Kofi can't do it all. We are going to need more people to go out there and continue to kind of build whatever this next generation is for craft beer in the world. But to directly answer your question, there are volumes of knowledge that are probably lost from what has currently been recorded. And there's so much more that beer can be, that until we kind of just open up and become more open-minded about the different ingredients that can be worked with, we'll never get there. I mean, Leo, I don't know how you feel, but and Liz, you can speak to this too probably, but up until like 3-4 years ago, people said you cannot make beer with millet or sorghum. Cannot. Like, I remember I was asking very early on, because that's what we grow in West Africa. We don't grow wheat and barley and all these other things. And so one of my really early questions was, well, how can I make this with this? Because I don't have this. And the answer straight up was, it cannot be done, which I found to be not true after you meet more people, look into it and experiment it for yourself. But if all you're going by is what people are writing, then I should have quit 5 years ago, because the things that I'm now doing were technically impossible, right? So that's the importance of, you know, making sure that we understand what our history is, we understand the details of how to recreate and to pay homage to that, and then to change it so that it's adaptable for where we are now and where we're going in the next 100 years, maybe.
Yeah, you're probably gonna get a whole lot more people interested in beer with millet and sorghum, because everybody's trying to be gluten-free, and those are grains that you can use to do that.
Well, funny enough, now that that's a trend, all of a sudden you can make beer with these things now.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
But
so that's something that's really important for us. Like, just because someone says it can't be done, well, they don't have the culture or the history, right? And most of us don't know it, so we don't have it either. But they don't like, that's an honest answer for them. It's not that they lied to me. They really don't know.
Yeah. And actually,
so if there's something so basic like that, Denise and Leo, that they don't know, then what else could we be doing that people don't know that we could be doing? I don't know, right? That's the known unknown.
Right. Because we actually have a sorghum-based beer. So we promote it as gluten-free beer. And you know what we call it? It's called the motherland. Because we knew, Leo said, that's the traditional beer in Africa. It's made with sorghum. So if we're gonna do something like that, and I was like, well, we need to call it the motherland then, because that's what this is.
And every February we celebrate Black History Month. We call it Human History Month, because every single human being come from Africa. So we chose this year to honor one of the late president, which is Thomas Sankara, that was encouraging everyone to consume what you make. You know, what a great, you know, so we use red sorghum and the baobab to make that fruit. You know, it's an incredible beer, and this is to pay homage to him. He was one of the greatest human being I ever know, and he was all for the woman. He was one of the first president to push men to cook for their wives and to learn these kind of things. You know, it was all about the family and about, you know, about the whole continent of Africa. You know, unfortunately, he got killed because people like that can't live too long. He came too soon. So those are the kind of things we need to show what Africa have to offer, what a Black man have to offer, or a Black woman have to offer. You know, in a quiet manner. There's no need to talk about this anymore. We have to get to work, and that's it. I hate to talk about it. I would love to show it, you know, so people know. You're talking about it all the time. It's not gonna do anything. We need to get to work.
Yeah,
That's
Leo
it.
said, don't talk about it, be about it. All right, Jamhal, what's your take on beer history and how, you know, the influence from Africa is absent?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was kind of part of what, you know, inspired me. You know, I felt like again, the Moorish history is not commonly told here in America in general. You know what I mean? You know, most people don't know that, you know, a group of African people like invaded and occupied Europe for over 700 years. You know what I mean? And they were dark and Black people. They looked like you and I. But you know, more specifically though, you know, the scientific methods that and techniques that they brought with them to Europe, which included the distilling and fermentation process. They created what they called alcohol, or what we know now today as alcohol, right? So they were, you know, fermenting and distilling even then. You know, they pretty much civilized that continent. So, you know, it's just a number of African history. I mean, just coupling what the gentleman and the young lady already said about, you know, sorghum and things like that. So we definitely dove into those. Well, I definitely researched sorghum and African beer quite extensively when we were thinking about, like, you know, ingredients and things like that, because we wanted to be a little more authentic. I will say though, I learned a lot, you know, from Montclair, and I'd like to come and try that sorghum because, you know, I ultimately decided against sorghum because it was white beer. It was very, very light. Well, the ones that I've seen, and we were told how difficult it was to make, you know, and things like that. So that kind of like turned me off to sorghum. But so I would definitely like to try it, and I'll probably be in New Jersey at some point to do that. But no, I think it's important that we lean into our culture a lot more. You know, it's not necessarily you know, talking about it, but not being afraid to do so, right? I think in many respects, you know, people in the past have always tried to kind of, you know, do what everybody else has done, you know what I mean? And again, approach it from a beer enthusiast. Some loud people are driving past my house right now. Like a motorcycle gang. So excuse me. But I live in the city. So, but no, you know, I think, you know, leaning into the culture a lot more and telling those stories and spreading that history is important. I think that's what people care about, you know, I think all too often, you know, most of the legacy brands that people kind of consume, you know, they don't necessarily know the stories about those, you know, and they just kind of like, you know, consume it because they saw their parents doing it, or, you know, it's just this ongoing thing. But I think people are very much open to, African culture, Black culture, and again, I think it creates an opportunity for us to lean into it and educate, right? I think all too often Africans and African Americans overall, we curate culture, we curate cool, we own that, right? So I think it's time that we treat it like a true commodity, and leverage it in all that we do, in our brands, in our products, in our services, whatever, right? So I think that we need to absolutely lean into it and tell those stories, because the world needs to know. So that's my take.
Yeah, and create new legacy, right? How many products do we have in our homes because granny had them or mom used them, and we bought the same stuff and it's in our kitchen or in our bathroom or whatever right now?
Absolutely.
We should be creating these legacies and passing down these products and influencing, the culture here, just like we were influenced.
I totally agree.
But yeah.
I just want to add something real quick, if you don't mind. I don't know why, I just felt like I needed to say it, but I think part of the importance of reclaiming and really, owning the history is so that someone doesn't discover it in a year, if you get what I'm trying to say. And that's really kind of my driving motivation, because there's so much wealth out there. I'm not even going to call it culture, I'm going to call it wealth. There's so much wealth out there that we tend to kind of, being the curators of cool, right? We kind of take these things for granted, like it just is. It's like, oh yeah, we did this, like just it is what it is, I'll go do something else tomorrow. But no, like these things have value. There's cultural wealth there, and it would behoove us to lean in and to go and reclaim this culture, because yes, a lot of it will be lost, but not all of it. Some of it will just be claimed by someone else. And so I think that's also kind of a driving force for me to even talk about this stuff, because at least if it's been talked about, it's out there, and it's not something that like, oh, I've never heard of this, where did this sour beer from Ghana come from? Like all of a sudden they have sour beers, right? We've been making them for thousands of years, right? Like it's just that there's an important piece to that, and it's back full circle to the first question, right? If we don't tell the story and we don't do it, then someone else will, and then it's not really what it is.
Yeah, that's how we get stuff like boxer braids and sticky bangs. And when we don't step up and own our culture and say that, this belongs to us. And I think you all have valid points of leaning into it, not being ashamed of it. This is ours and it has value, like you said. So we got one more question in the chat. Speaking about gluten-free aspect earlier and traditions, anyone stateside working cassava, tapioca, or yuca into brews? Anybody doing that?
Right now, brewing, it's yuca. Right now brewing yuca. There's many countries in Africa that found that alternative of brewing with cassava, because first of all, you put people to work, and it's much more efficient and a lot more healthier than the brewing with corn. So those are the things. So if you go to Uganda, they're already making that. All the beers made with yuca. I just started making vodka with those guys, with sweet potato, yuca, and then also making beer with that. So it is very efficient, and it's a very, very interesting kind of roots. So brewing with yuca, it's incredible. The beer is very light and very, very, very good to drink. Yep.
Yeah, we haven't launched that yet.
No, not yet.
So
It's
really,
probably a small batch.
Yes.
So we don't know.
what's interesting is I just connected with a Black farmer out of Arkansas that they grow their own sweet potatoes, and they have a vodka, and they're distilling gin and whiskey and bourbon as well. But the vodka is amazing. You
Oh,
know, yeah, it's, you're the second person I hear to use sweet potato, but no, I think that's a great idea. I'm looking
No,
forward to trying
definitely.
it as well.
Yeah, definitely. The people, I think, you know, when you're a brewer, you have to take a chance. That's what makes brewing interesting. If we don't try these things, we will never know, you know, and you must be not afraid to fail, you know. You must be not afraid to brew a funky beer. And that's how it is. I experiment every minute of the day. Every single day, I experiment. So that's what I'm all about. Yeah.
Yeah, so I haven't tried the yucca beer because I guess it's in some tank or something, someplace.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
It's in the
But
making.
yeah, but he does do a lot of experimenting, and he said it's good to do like a small batch so then you know what it's like. So you're not, just in case you don't know what it's gonna turn out.
Yeah.
You're not risking too much of it. So.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, we talked about cassava too. That was actually, it's funny because once again, that's another thing that's in the Caribbean. See, and I grew up, my mother telling me a story about cassava, how my grandmother used to go to the market and sell it, and they would make starch from it and all of this. And then he's talking about cassava in Africa. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So, but yeah, so I'm sure
Well,
eventually we'll
Yeah. In every
try
country,
some beer.
right. In every country you go in Africa, these are things you would find. You go to Ghana, there's plenty of cassava. There's also yam and sweet potato. You find that locally in the market. You go to Burkina, it's the same thing. And also it's widely consumed throughout Ivory Coast. They call it atieke. And I was surprised to find they call it bami in Jamaica. So this is what you can find throughout the whole continent. So we recently started to integrate, you know, hot pepper into our beer. We make a mango beer we call Mango Fire, and it got some pepper in that beer. When you drink it, you would feel it on the throat. So, you know, those are the kind of things, you know, that we experiment
with Scotch bonnet pepper, which is from Jamaica.
Yeah.
I in beer yet, so you beat them to the punch. You beat them to that question.
Yeah, we haven't launched anything. I've done some experimentation with cassava. I love cassava. I always say, at least for West African people, cassava is the backbone. Like, I mean, people in Africa know, but people outside Africa don't understand how essential cassava is, like, to the everyday life of West African people. It is literally the backbone. And so I've done some experimentation. Frankly, Leo, I think I need to come brew with you. They haven't been great. So we need to keep experimenting. But I thought of something as soon as we went here, just back to my last point, right? A couple of years ago, one of the big companies, is it SAB Miller in Ghana? Yeah, I think it is. They have a cassava beer that they launched 6 years ago. I don't like it because it's not a true cassava beer. It really is cassava and maize, that corn that we were talking about earlier. So they're really like using cassava, probably very little barley, and then like just cutting it with a ton of corn. So it's not a great product, but that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? Like they sold it as like, oh, we have this brand new, never before seen cassava beer now in bottles coming from SAB Miller, and it's just, people eat that up, but it's not really a novel product. And not only is it not novel, it's done in the worst way that you can do it, in my personal opinion. So I think that, you know, there is tons of opportunities. It's just people need to experiment and figure it out, and then share that knowledge, and then that's when you start to see a proliferation of these sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, there's just the ingredient list is endless of things that are not currently being used in what you would call beer traditionally. And that's the other thing, right? Like you come up with something new, they don't want to classify it as beer. It's something else. Is this not a fermented beverage from grains?
Yep.
Right. So there's there's a lot of those sorts of battles I think we're going to have to fight in the future, even when we kind of start to establish kind of, you know, and what is an African beer? Like, what beer are people drinking around the world that comes out of Africa right now, right? And that's what I was going to say. As soon as we start to establish our African beers, which we don't really have yet, but when that comes, we have to own the processes and the culture behind that. Otherwise, it's really just something else repackaged.
Yeah, and it sounds like, you just gave us one example of people taking something from somewhere they're not from and not knowing what to do with it.
Right. So if you look throughout the world, there's literally two type of beer. You get the Belgium kind of beer and the German kind of beer. So Africa is left out. So it is going to be up to all of us, to create something that reflect the continent, even though it's already exists in Africa, but all the big company are trying to dominate those kind of things. So we need to bring it back and to make them understand that beer start up here and it shall remain, and they should appreciate that first. So these are the kind of things that we decided to work on. So ever since we opened the brewery, a lot of people are interested in trying these different things in some of the craft brewery back home in Burkina. And it is refreshing to see them releasing some beer that is come from literally from the country. I can't understand how a country is like it's 80 degrees during the day, and then everybody drink only lager. Lager is you need cooling to make lager. It's still kind of drive me crazy to think about that. So we need to create something that is literally African, that you can brew without, needed some cooling system to cool down the beer, like those lager that come from Germany. And unfortunately, these are the beer that kind of dominate in the continent. Yeah.
Yeah, and owning a supply chain, when you speak to know a farmer who has this or grows that, when we can get in there and really make things from a supply chain that we own as people of the diaspora,
Absolutely,
have more control over.
Oh yeah, and sustainability is going to be the key for us to bring it to the next level. I make that my. I cannot let any food go to waste. You can do, a lot of things with that. Either you turn that into a jam or you distill it. That's what it is. So you can't let all these food go to waste. So, yeah.
Okay, we got one last question and we'll wrap it up here. It says, how much will cassava come out in the flavor versus alcohol by volume? Can you taste it, or does it raise the ABV a tad?
Absolutely. Anything that made come from starch can turn into alcohol. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. If you take corn, you ferment corn and you add some enzyme in there, you will get a lot of sugar. And that's how they make whiskey. That's how they make bourbon, part corn, part, malted barley. So cassava is no different from any of that. Any starch you take, you can turn that into alcohol. You can raise up the ABV as much as you want. So it's the same thing from red sorghum or white sorghum. As long as it's malted, it got some sugar. And as long as it got sugar, you would get some alcohol out of it.
Yeah.
That's the basic.
And your ABV is all based on kind of whatever grains you're using the sugar content within the starch, right? So cassava tends to be light and not as much sugar as you'll get out of like barley. You have to use more. So
Okay. So does anybody have any parting words? Anything you want to leave the people with? You want to plug?
Yeah,
well,
sure.
Okay, really go ahead.
I'll let you guys go, but no, I think it was I appreciate Liz for inviting me and Moore's Brewing Company. We're a very young company. We're very excited about the progress that we're making. Very a pleasure to meet you all. I definitely want to try your beers as soon as I possibly can. It's great to see others in the space looking to grow the space in different ways. great to hear the inspirations and the motivation. And I think it's great to learn from everyone. I mean, I think, again, we should, definitely continue this process, things like this, continue to educate, the public on Africans and African Americans in beer, and even the different flavors and ways that we could make beer, right? So I think this is great, and I appreciate meeting you all. Follow Moore's Beer on IG at Moore's Beer, and visit our website, mooresbeer.com. Thank you.
All right. Leo, you were jumping in there.
Yeah, well, it's great that you guys do this kind of stuff, so everybody can get together and have a conversation. It's very, very important. And I just want to say when you go to Ghana, bring anything you can. Absolutely. We're gonna make the trip and come up and try some of your beer. And this is what I love to see. Ghana is my second country, to be honest with you. I remember when Burkina played Ghana, my son looked at me and said, "Now you're in trouble." Because the Black Star, this is my team. So, I don't usually watch the game between Ghana and Burkina. I just walk away. It's unfair to me. So, but listen, bring anything you can. There's endless ingredient in Ghana. It's just incredible. Ghana is the second largest producer of cocoa. Make sure you bring some of that and make some beer with it.
Oh, I need to send you our Cocoa Coast.
Oh.
We already do that.
Yeah, do that. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. Tried that.
But this is great. This is fantastic. I'm glad we was part of it, and then be able to talk and learn from each other.
Yeah.
It's really, really important.
Yeah, and I was going to say that. Now, I'm glad that this session was added. I know I saw some of the other two sessions, but I was more excited about this session, especially because of who was going to be involved in it. And I was like, okay, we're going to have a really great group of people representing. And I think that makes a huge difference because, as you mentioned before, it's like we got to own it or somebody else will. And that's so important. It's like we're talking about African brewing or the influence. It makes sense for it to be people that look African or something talking about that and doing that. It makes a world of difference. So it's really excited about this session. So thanks for putting it together. And as far as shouting out, just shout out our Instagram too. So definitely follow us if you're not already at Montclair Brew on Instagram. We're also on Facebook. Same thing, Montclair Brew. And you could check out our website or subscribe to our monthly newsletter at montclairbrewery.com.
Okay.
Well, thank you all so very much for being here and being a part of this conversation. It's such an important conversation that amazingly doesn't happen, right, in different beer circles. So we're happy to host this and put this together. Thanks to our buddies over in Europe, BeoirFest, for hosting the series. You can find Kofi, Sankofa Beer Company out of the DC area, Jamhal Moore's Brewing in Chicago, and Denise and Leo Montclair Brewery in New Jersey. Toni with BlaQ and Soul, based in LA, but really just a citizen of the world, bouncing around, doing some good stuff. Thank you all for joining us. Drink all those beers. Get inspired. I know I've been thankful that I've been able to actually do a different event with Kofi in DC and drink his beers. And I've the pleasure of living in Chicago, so I've got Moores in my backyard, and now I got to make my way over to Montclair to drink some good unique beers. But anyway, thank you all again for joining the Brewseum on this, chicagobrewseum.org. Appreciate you all. Have a good rest of your night. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
All right.
Bye-bye.